Hey everybody, I'm sorry it's been a while since I posted a lecture. Um, I have to work another job to sort of make ends meet. I work as a hand model. See, they're really quite beautiful. I take good care of them. Nails trimmed. Um, I kid, of course. I'm not a hand model, although that sounds like it would be a cool job. But yeah, I do some editing for a journal, and so I'm trying to balance those two things. And I really apologize that this is coming in late. But this is the last lecture, so this is going to encapsulate both ethnicity and nationalism. Less so on nationalism, I guess. It's mainly focused on ethnicity, and so that's going to be the focus. Okay. Um, I still owe you a lecture on the TIV, the Bohannon article, and I will also post that today. It's going to be a short one, just touching on the main points because it's a difficult article, and I'm not going to expect you to recite like all of the details of it. There's just like specific things I want you to take away from it. Okay, so ethnicity. Ethnicity is a tricky subject, not least of which because we have not yet talked about race. I'm saving that kind of for its own couple of lectures, at least a couple of lectures in there. Um, so that's going to make certain aspects of this a little bit difficult. But the first thing that you need to know, and this is key, is that a language is not always synonymous with a culture, and a culture is not always synonymous with an ethnicity, and an ethnicity is not always synonymous with a race. Okay? So, this is one area where I think the general public minces words. And even in the past, archaeologists, who I should show you, there's a picture that I should show you. I'm just making a mental note. A fascinating and disturbing picture of archaeology in the early part of the 20th century. But anyway, old school archaeologists used to make this mistake all the time because archaeology was a very nationalistic pursuit in its early days, and so people would see, obviously with archaeology, especially if you're doing prehistoric archaeology, you don't have a written record. By definition, prehistoric means before the written record. So there's no written record of how people identified themselves, how they viewed their relationships with their own group, other groups. And so all archaeologists have to go on is the material remains that are left behind by people. And so in the early days, archaeologists used to see pots that are kind of similar to one another, that have similar techniques and similar designs. And there's this famous kind of cautionary phrase since that time, which is that pots are not people. But they treated pots almost as if they were people. That anywhere they would find this pottery that was similar, that was a people, quote unquote, which implied, sorry, that this was like almost like a race of people, and that they must have been bearers of the same language, and there were all these assumptions built into it. Now, that might not seem super silly to you, or maybe it does, but consider today, right? There are McDonald's in Las Vegas, there's McDonald's in Moscow, there's McDonald's in Alaska, there's McDonald's in Peru, there's probably McDonald's in New Guinea somewhere. Now, if archaeologists in the future were to find, the golden arches in all these different places, they might, if they were using this old paradigm, they'd assume, oh my God, the McDonald's people or the golden arches people must have taken over the globe. There must have been one race of people speaking one language with one culture. So that's a very outdated kind of mode of thinking. We know that it's a lot more complicated than that. So keep that in mind, okay? Now, I came up with this little schematic. If it helps you, great. If you find it even more confusing, disregard it. But let's say, okay, this circle represents all the people that speak a certain language, language one, right? Now, among those people that speak this language, there can be multiple ethnic groups, right? So think about Spanish, right? People in Spain speak Spanish. People in Mexico speak Spanish. People in Colombia speak Spanish. People in Puerto Rico speak Spanish and English. And that's not all one ethnicity, right? Or English, think about English, right? There's obviously in England, in the United States, in Canada, and Australia, but also in African colonies of England, in India, people speak English along with a lot of other languages. In Belize, believe it or not, people speak English along with Spanish. So a language is not necessarily synonymous with an ethnic group, right? Now, there can also be an ethnic group that speaks multiple languages, right? So if you want to consider, say, a Mexican identity to be an ethnic group, now I say that because it could also be considered a nationality. There are obviously a lot. Most people speak Spanish, but there's also indigenous groups that speak other languages, and like Aztecan type languages or Nahuatl. So there can be ethnic groups that speak multiple languages. I was trying to think of another like obvious example off the top of my head, but I'll save us some time and keep moving. Now, a race. Without unpacking right now what race is, because that's a whole huge topic, just think of what Joe Schmo on the street considers races to be. Just hypothetically. So we take any race, pick a race. And within that race, there's going to be multiple languages spoken. There's going to be multiple ethnic groups, right? So a race is not one-to-one with an ethnic group, okay? Again, whether you consider white people or Caucasian people to be a race, right? There's obviously multiple different languages spoken by the white man. There's multiple cultures, multiple nationalities, right? If you consider African or black to be a race, right, there's obviously within Africa alone, dozens of languages and cultures and ethnic identities, right? And then there's the African diaspora. Okay, so so the same language. So if you look at language one here, right, the same language can also be spoken by more than one race, right? Okay, that's obvious. Within a certain ethnic group, you can even have people of multiple races within an ethnic group. So if you look at a lot of areas of the Caribbean and even like in Central America, like Guatemala, there's people of Mayan descent. There's people of Spanish descent. There's people of mixed descent. There's also people of African descent, called the Garifuna population. And if you want to consider either Guatemalan as an ethnic group, which you may or may not, or a nationality. Or if you want to go broader and consider sort of a pan-ethnic group of, Latino or Latinx or Hispanic. Obviously, there can be people of multiple races in that. And also, within an ethnic group, you can also sort of have maybe even sub-ethnic groups, right? In the sense that, again, if we're talking about like a pan-ethnic group, like Latinx, within that, you obviously have a whole host of other smaller ethnic groups, right? And yeah, I'm just, you get the point. Okay. So hopefully that showed to you that ethnicity is not one-to-one with language, is not one-to-one with culture, is not one-to-one with race. Okay. Now, because culture, I didn't mention culture in there, but if you go back to our definition of culture as something that's learned, something that's shared, something that's symbolic, we use loosely in like everyday life, not necessarily within academia, but outside of academia, we use the word culture a lot of times to mean a nationality or an ethnicity. But from the anthropological standpoint, culture is a set of shared understandings, and that can be a what we might call in the colloquial world, we might call like a subculture. It could be like a culture of gamers, could be like a culture of climbers, it could be a culture of university students or the culture at UNLV. It could be cultural traditions within your family, right? So culture is also not, necessarily one-to-one with ethnicity. Within ethnicity, there are necessarily shared cultural understandings, okay? But the word culture has a different set of meanings than ethnicity. Ethnicity is a specific type of group identity, okay? So one way to look at it is it's a group of people whose members share particular specific beliefs, values, habits, customs, and norms, okay? I'll come back to why I'm emphasizing specific or particular. Now, for an ethnic group necessarily has some kind of like markers, almost like symbols of identity, right? And it could include one or more of the following. Could be a collective group name, okay? Like the Igbo in Nigeria, I believe. It could be a belief in common descent, like a belief that everybody within this ethnic group can trace their ancestry to a distant, hero. So, back in the kind of Romantic period, which is sort of like a historical period after the Enlightenment, when a lot of European groups were trying to like reclaim some kind of identity as nation states. The Irish, for example, who had been, under the thumb of the English for hundreds of years, really started to play up at this Celtic mythology. And I don't know for a fact that people would have said this, but you could imagine people saying that like all Irish people can trace their ancestry to Brian Boru, the High King that united all the kingdoms of Ireland back in the medieval times, or something like this. Whether or not that's true, So a belief in common descent doesn't necessarily mean you can prove it all the way back. Like you don't necessarily have to have all these documents or whatever. But if you ask someone, what does it mean to be a member of this group? They might say, well, we all descend from so and so. If you take, say, Jewish scriptures literally, everybody might descend from Abraham, Okay. Okay, a sense of solidarity with one another, association with a specific territory, whether or not the group holds that territory. All right, so again, pick any number of kind of ethnic identities that you are familiar with, which again, I know in our day and age oftentimes overlap with nationalities, but setting that aside for a second, whether you think of Irish or Mexican or Chinese or whatever, there's obviously all kinds of diaspora groups that live outside of this territory that we have identified with this group, right? And yet people will still just as strongly identify as being part of that group. So it's a mental association with a territory. Sometimes styles of dress, as you saw in the opening slide, can be indicators of ethnicity. A certain mode of subsistence, which again is, how people make their living, whether it's, everybody in this group, we are pastoralists, and that's in our blood, that's our way of life, or hunter-gatherers, or what have you. It could be a certain religion. So again, that's kind of, at least in the modern age, obviously, there's all kinds of globalization, and there's all kinds of water under the bridge of diasporas and events that shape identity and change identity. But if you go back, I don't know, a few centuries or more, Judaism was a large feature of a kind of Jewish ethnic identity, right? So that could be part of it as well. So again, as I said, it's a type of group identity, ethnicity. But obviously there's other kinds of group identity that include class, economically speaking, nationality, as I've said, an interest group or some kind of subculture, a religion, a region. So there's all kinds of different there's all kinds of different group identities. Now, ethnicity is at least partially ascribed, meaning that there's some agency, there's some choice in identifying as a particular ethnicity. Whereas with race, and again, we'll talk way more about this later on, but with race, you don't choose your race, right? Despite recent attempts by a few people that have come out in the media as having tried to pass themselves off as a different race. Race is typically, and historically, it has been something that has been stamped upon you by the outside, right? So it's not like you're born and you can be whatever you want, and then, around the age of 12 or something, you're like, I'm going to decide that this is my race. No, you're classified by other people, like at the moment that they meet you, right? And race is a huge historical construct. So you're already born into a world that has an idea of what race is, how many races there are, what are the criteria for being classified as a certain race, right? Ethnicity, on the other hand, is something that you have some degree of choice about. It is, now you may be born into a family that identifies itself as being part of a particular ethnic group, and you may be raised that way, and in that sense, that's not your choice. But you can choose to play up or to play down aspects of that, because ethnicity has these markers, like I said, whether that's language, whether that's dress, whether that's a religion. And so ethnicity can kind of be used So that's the next point. Ethnicity can be instrumental, meaning it can be used by individuals and groups strategically in different social situations. So let's say that, you know, in our pluralistic society, obviously, like, we're part of a nation that has numerous ethnicities, and I don't know that there's a real ethnic awareness of being American. I'm not so sure that, because we're a pluralistic society and because we're a society that attempts anyway, at our best, to celebrate diversity rather than force everybody into the same cookie cutter, we don't really have as much of a group sense of identity, of ethnicity, I mean. But nonetheless, when you're with your family, right, you can choose to play up certain aspects of your group identity, or when you're with other people that share your group identity, you can choose to sort of celebrate that and show it. But if you're in a different situation where you're with a group of people that is different, you have a choice. There are some times when you might want to really show your ethnic affiliation, and there are other times when you might kind of play down aspects of it so as to bond with a group of people of different ethnicities. I know that's really abstract, but I don't want to rely too much on using any one example. But just think of language, right? If you're someone who's bilingual, you can sort of switch off depending on the situation, and not only depending on whether the other person speaks language A or language B, but maybe sometimes to make a point, right? So obviously, the most widely spoken language in the U.S. other than English is Spanish, and so let's talk about like a Latinx type group identity. If people identify each other through one of the markers of ethnicity, which could be, I don't know, you're wearing a shirt that has a flag on it, or some kind of identifier of a national identity that might fit within an ethnic identity, or if it's just based on stereotypes, because oftentimes race and ethnicity in our society do kind of sit on top of each other sometimes. For whatever reason, you're out somewhere in public, you're at a concert or you're at a store or something, and you identify a person that might be part of the Latinx community, and you kind of have a choice of, am I going to address that person in Spanish, or am I going to address that person in English? You have to make some assumptions there. If you have reason to believe that the person speaks Spanish, you could either speak Spanish in an effort to sort of bond over a shared identity, or you could bond over the shared identity of being, like in a pluralistic society where English is the lingua franca. You can use that to make a political statement. You can use that to make a statement of solidarity. You can use that to make a statement of resistance. Okay. So that's just one example. But outside of the United States and outside of post-industrial capitalist society, if you think of smaller scale societies, there are times when people can shift ethnicities. So through marriage, sometimes if you marry into a different group, you can become subsumed into the other ethnic group. You just kind of have to perform that ethnicity. because as I said, there are specific kind of markers, specific things that are shared symbols of that ethnicity. So there's a guy, an anthropologist, who in, I think it was 1969, wrote a seminal work about ethnicity, and it was a critique of how anthropologists had previously approached ethnicity. And so he said that previously people had seen ethnicity as static, unchanging, right? That an ethnicity is always the same through time. Bounded, meaning there's clear borders of who's in, who's out, and can even be defined from the outside, right? So bounded genetically and bounded culturally. Homogeneous, everybody within is somehow more similar to each other than they are to anyone outside. And they saw it as arising out of isolation, that a group would develop a unique character by not having contact with other groups. I didn't make you read this Eric Wolf article, so forget about this billiard balls thing. But the billiard balls basically, in this case, would represent like identities where they might bounce up against each other, but there's no blending. There's real clear where one begins and the other ends. Okay? Now, those were his critiques. That's how he said that anthropologists were approaching it. What he postulated, what he asserted about it, was, first of all, ethnicity does not arise from isolation. In fact, it arises from interaction. Interaction is a necessary component for the formation of ethnicities. So, within any ethnic group, people don't really have to go around saying like, hey guys, I'm part of this group. Oh, you're part of this group too. We're part of this group. Yay. Like they're in the absence of something else, something to contrast or compare, things that are more salient are kinship, family ties, whether they are true ties or imagined ties to some kind of, some kind of individual that everybody is descended from. It's why, like, I personally, I might be putting my foot in my mouth here, but I personally find it a little kind of funny, like not like hilarious funny, but kind of funny when people in the United States like showing flags and wearing flag stuff all the time, and like it's like, yeah, we're all here, we're all, yes, like, who are you telling that you're an American? Because I'm an American too. That person's American. That person's American. We're all American. It's kind of like wearing the shirt of the band to the concert that you're going to. I know a lot of people do it. I have done it in the past, but it's a little tacky. Come on, it's a little tacky. It's like everybody knows you're a fan. You're already at the concert. You paid to be here. You're spending your time here. You like the band. It's obvious. But or like, and I know this is popular. I know this is popular on college campuses. So forgive me. I'm not trying to insult anybody, but like, wearing a UNLV shirt to UNLV. Oh, you go to UNLV? Huh? No kidding. Yeah, me too. No, it's great. It's school spirit. I get it. But the what makes it more important to display your group identity, or to try to find contrasting things that set you apart from others, is being with others. So in that sense, I get the American flag clothes and on trucks and all this stuff, because it's because of the political climate that we're in right now. It's not necessarily to say, hey guys, I'm an American too. It's just there's a subtext there of, I believe in this, and this. that wouldn't be necessary if everybody were on the same political page. You wouldn't have to be cheerleading, yay, rah, because you'd be preaching to the choir, you know. So, in fact, a celebration or a ostentatious showing of identity is only logical or necessary, really, when there's something to contrast that with. So, these things like switching off between different languages, depending on what context you're in, are ways to create a solidarity, or to display a resistance, or to send a message. It's about communication, and in this case, it's about communicating a group identity. So if everybody's in the same group identity, you're not really communicating anything, you know. Now, okay, so that was long-winded, but it's important. I hope that at least I get the point across that a sense of a very particular group identity in which there are particular markers that distinguish you as part of this group only becomes really important when there are other groups. Also, Barth asserts that ethnic groups are not static in terms of culture or in terms of membership. So, I could talk about Poland because I did research there. Also, like Mexico, which again, I know I'm relying on nationalities, but those are just kind of the things that are most familiar to us. But like, if you think about a Mexican identity, now 500 years ago, before Spanish colonization, there wouldn't have been a Mexican identity, right? There would have been an Aztec identity and a Zapotec identity and a Maya identity and and all the different regional ethnic groups and group identities, right? You may have been within a territory that was ruled by the Aztec ascendancy, but there are other identities within that, and there are other identities outside of that within the modern territory of the modern nation state of Mexico. So what defines this identity has certainly changed, and also the culturally, like on this territory, things have also changed, right? Because now there's indigenous traditions and indigenous reimaginations along with Spanish traditions and reimaginations. There's a fusion, and also things that have developed since then, right? Even look at Al Pastor, right? The taco meat that really comes from a fusion of, I believe it was Lebanese immigrants to Mexico City, using the sort of shawarma, cooking things on a spit, and they would have been, if it were a Muslim population, they would have been cooking lamb probably, but in Mexico, pork was very popular, so you get your pork, you get, you get this blend of things that come together and create something new. You could discuss the same kind of thing with any kind of ethnic identity or national identity, but it's one that I think paints the picture really well. So the culture changes within an ethnicity over time. The membership also changes. Not least of which because people die and people are born, right? So a snapshot of one ethnicity one year, and then the next year is going to be different, at least because there are people who have died and there are people who have been born. Beyond that, like I said, in small scale societies, there's more of a fluidity because of things like marriage, or maybe because of subsistence. Maybe you sort of go into a territory where there's already a group that has been there doing a certain type of subsistence, and you sort of join in because of who knows what, climatic changes or resource pressure, or what have you. Okay, so if neither culture nor membership are necessarily static, they don't necessarily remain the same in this group identity. How do you define it? What is static? And Barth says what is static is the maintenance of a boundary. What that means is that the group kind of agrees upon, not like there's a meeting where everybody gets together and says, so folks, what are we going to decide as our mode of dress, or our language, or this, that, or that. But it's something that is created through social interaction. But there are certain identifiers of this group identity, right? Now, like I said before, that could be language, it could be religion, it could be claiming some kind of descent from some individual or group of individuals. It could be keeping certain traditions, eating certain foods. So the kinds of things that you celebrate together when you want to show your group identity around other groups. Now, it's a little tricky because even that can change over time, but what doesn't change is that some kind of boundary is maintained. What defines the boundary may change over time, but socially, collectively, people are kind of tacitly agreeing upon what defines this group. So it's a very fluid process. And like I said, it's based on particular selected aspects of culture. There's no one-to-one correspondence between culture as a whole and ethnicity, which means not everything that a group does is going to factor into identity, ethnic identity, because a group is made up of multiple people, not just one person, and every person is different, right? So even if this person's Christian and that person's Christian and that person's Christian, and even specifically within that, if this person is Catholic and that person is Catholic and that person is Catholic, they're going to have different approaches to Catholicism, different things that they agree on or don't agree on. They may all go to church on Sunday, or they may all take communion once in a while, or maybe they only go to church on Christmas or Easter. But everybody has a slightly different approach. So the things that define the boundary of an ethnicity are specific aspects of culture. And let me see. Okay. So you can't know a priori ahead of time if you're encountering a group for the first time. You can't know ahead of time like what they're going to consider salient to their group identity, because it's decided upon within this group. I already mentioned that ethnicity is self-ascribed. It's chosen to a degree. It's more fluid than race, which is something that's foisted upon you by the outside. Ethnicity is performed in the sense that there are these agreed upon signals of your ethnic identity, right? And like I said, you can choose to display them, to play them up, to play them down at different times. But it's kind of like, it's a group where you have to keep renewing your membership in a way, hypothetically. Now, an ethnic identity is not necessarily antagonistic. Just because it comes from interaction between two groups, that doesn't necessarily mean that that interaction is always antagonistic. It could be symbiotic, actually, and interdependent. So Barth goes through these case studies from small scale societies, where he shows sometimes where they're independent. There's one ethnic group that's pastoralist that relies almost exclusively on herding animals, and there's one group that's farmers. But pastoralists can't survive just on animal products all the time. They need some things from farmers, and farmers need some products from the pastoralists. So maintaining some kind of boundary so that there are these two groups who are specializing in these two things, and they can share with one another, could be important in certain situations. Now, how is this enforced? How are these behaviors or norms or values or symbols of the ethnicity, how are they enforced? Well, Barth says these behaviors are enforced on both sides of the boundary, both from within the group and outside the group. Now, this is a quote from his work, which again comes from 1969. So, this may not be as, this example might not be as true today as it was in 1969, but he says, the sanctions producing adherence to group-specific values are not only exercised by those who share the identity. Just as both sexes ridicule the male who is feminine, and all classes punish the proletarian who puts on airs, so also can members of ethnic groups act to maintain differences. What he means there is, at least back in 1969, right? Gender nonconformity was not celebrated, to the degree that it is now, or tolerated to the degree that it is now. And obviously, we still have a long way to go with that. But he's making a point that a male who acts feminine, however society defines that, is ridiculed not only by certain other males, but is also sometimes ridiculed by certain other females, right? So on both sides of this boundary, on both sides of this cultural idea of what it means to be masculine, or what it means to be part of this ethnic group, these norms are policed and enforced from both sides, right? You're pressure from both sides to be a certain way. And he says, all classes punish the proletarian who puts on airs. So somebody who's born into a working class family, or is sort of on a lower socioeconomic level, who maybe tries to look more like an upper class person, or act more like an upper class person, or talk like an upper class person. They can be called uppity from the outside, right? Someone saying, they should know their place. And again, hopefully this isn't the experience that most people have in today's America, but it certainly is something that is a familiar phenomenon in lots of parts of early capitalist society anyway. And people within will also, call that person out for sort of pretending and thinking that they're better than everybody else, right? So the idea of what it means to be part of a group is policed both within that group and outside of that group. Here's some pop culture examples. Now, I don't know how many of you will recognize the guy on the right. Maybe I'm dating myself here, but that is Vanilla Ice. And of course, we've got Eminem. Now, this I created these slides a few years back. So on the left, we have Rachel Dolezal, who was a white woman who had essentially told everybody that she was black, and had obviously had her hair done, and tried to tried to make herself appear to be of ambiguous sort of racial classification, and she used that to lead a chapter of the NAACP, I believe. And then I put Wayne Brady here on the right-hand side because there was a funny Dave Chappelle sketch years ago, I guess, when he was saying how much middle class white suburban ladies love Wayne Brady, and anyway, this is meant to be a little bit of comedy, but we probably all are familiar with certain insults that are used to police, acting like a different race, whatever that means. Oreo, Twinkie, coconut, and these are things that are used both within and without, right? These types of things, maybe not these exact phrases, right? But it's a way of shaming somebody, saying you should know your place. You're not supposed to act like that because you're supposed to be part of this group, and this group acts like whatever. Okay, so so an ethnic identity can also be policed in a similar kind of way. Now, these were some links to some various videos that I would show parts of in class sometimes. I'm not going to require that you watch any of these. Actually, I'm going to post YouTube links to maybe just the bottom two, the ones about the Black Seminole Indians and the Gullah, which shows how race and ethnicity are not necessarily the same thing, and how an ethnicity can be multiracial and a race can be multi-ethnic. What else was I going to say about that? I don't know. I think that's about it. Oh, I know what I was going to say. So the reason that I think ethnicity is so often confused with nationality and with race is because in the United States anyway, those three often get conflated. Now, if you think about everything that we just talked about in terms of ethnic affiliation, a group identity, and that coming from interactions with other groups, it makes sense that in our society, race and ethnicity can oftentimes go together because even though race is something that's foisted upon individuals from the outside, right? These are definitions that were historically created and were designed to categorize. And again, we're born into a world that has these categories already in society. So you are branded, right, with whatever race you are, almost from the time you're born, and you are treated accordingly. So even more so in the past, right, your opportunities were tied to race, right? Your rights were tied to race. So, if groups of people are treated differently for hundreds of years and told that they're different and faced different life circumstances and had different obstacles and different opportunities, and there was a hierarchy of privileges, and some groups were treated inhumanely and looked down upon, right? Naturally, that's going to shape your identity and your culture, right? So there become salient ways of recognizing and celebrating achievements and sharing in struggles, right? And that becomes a part of an identity. So if you think about the possibility of, say, an African American ethnic identity. Well, the process through which that formed was the process in which you had Africans of, again, probably dozens of different ethnic identities, forcibly taken and then treated in a group as if they were the same, right? And given fewer opportunities and classified as a homogeneous group, essentially, right? Now, within that, even though there were multiple ethnicities at the start, there became a common experience over the generations, right? And salient aspects of that experience that contrast with, say, white groups, can then become fodder for markers of a group identity, right? And that group identity can be used to support one another, for solidarity, to struggle against injustices, right? So that's why race, even though race is a concept that was created from the outside and foisted upon people from the outside, a group identity came out of being treated as a homogeneous group and being treated very differently from other groups. I hope that helps to explain why there's some confusion about race and ethnicity, but race is simply a social category that is created by the outside, okay? Whereas ethnicity is a group identity that is negotiated within the group and is in contrast to other groups, okay? It's not static in membership or culture, but there's a boundary that the group sort of maintains. And even if the characteristics of that boundary might change over time, the maintenance of the boundary keeps some kind of stability in the existence and formation of this ethnic identity. Okay, I know that's like kind of meta, but I hope that helps. I'm not expecting you to be theoretical experts in ethnicity, but I would like you to know some key differences between ethnicity and race. Okay. So I will leave it at that, and I'll try to post this and a TIV video later today. Okay. See you guys soon.